The courtroom was filled to the brim. Weeks had passed, yet there was no verdict on the case. The case against Daniel Myers, a man accused of murdering philanthropist Shawn Mendes, should have been straightforward, at least because the evidence was damning. Lucky for Daniel, Pam came to his rescue. However, the judge thought that by insulting her, she would lose her confidence and eventually lose the case. But the reverse was the case, and things turned out in a way that no one would have thought possible. What happened to the case, and what was the final verdict? The murder case of the century had been ongoing for weeks without a verdict from the judge. It began to look like the judge and jury were stalling for someone or something, and no one could tell why the case was still on. It should have been over from the very first day. Something wasn't right. Daniel Myers was the culprit, according to the news. Sources even say he was the professional hitman who was hired to murder Shawn Mendes. According to sources, Shawn and Daniel used to be close buddies and did many terrible things together. Unfortunately, things fell apart when Daniel went to prison, and according to sources, it was Shawn who snitched on Daniel. Could that be true? Nobody could tell that Daniel did have a criminal record, but not from criminal cases in Peneva, which were criminal records from his juvenile days. Daniel wasn't from Peneva, so how did he end up in this case? The media were making waves and doing all they could to cover the case. Shawn, the dearly beloved of everyone, was known to the public as a philanthropist who gave to society. Nobody ever questioned his wealth and riches, and now reporters were saying, based on information they got from their sources, that Shawn was into substances and used the money to set himself in high places among the citizens of Florida. Ever since the case started, the Shawn family has had to deal with a lot of police brutality and assets seized. His wife and child had to move to one of his friends' places to be safe. She was regularly invited to the police station for questioning, and from those questions, she heard many things about her husband, but she couldn't bring herself to believe them because she knew the man she married. He never had a spare phone for once, but she saw one when she went in for questioning. She wished she had followed him that day. Maybe things would have been different. She couldn't forgive herself for letting him out of the house at that time. Daniel, on the other hand, wished he had taken his friend's advice not to travel late, but because he wanted to get settled in the area before resuming work, he traveled late. Now, he was facing the consequences of doing whatever he liked and wanted. Maybe, just maybe, things would have been different if he had listened to his friend. For the past couple of weeks, while the case was ongoing, Daniel had no one to represent him in court. This shouldn't be so, because the city was supposed to provide him with an attorney if he couldn't afford one, as was stated as his constitutional right. Providing him an attorney was even going too far. He was always treated as a criminal and disrespected by even the officers who were supposed to protect him and uphold justice. Daniel couldn't even defend himself properly in court, which put him at a considerable disadvantage. The prosecutor kept twisting his words and kept trying to make him agree to a crime he didn't commit, and that would ruin him for life. He didn't want that to happen, not after spending the early days of his youth in prison. He wanted a new life, so he came to Peneva, hoping to resume his nursing studies and work, thereby making clean money for himself. All he could do until this moment was hope that a miracle would happen, and he would walk free from this case. Everyone was seated in court on the day that was supposed to be the last day for the case, and Daniel had lost all hope. He couldn't see a way to walk away from all this. The judge was about to give his verdict when the courtroom door opened, and a lady entered. This lady was 5 feet and 9 inches tall. She put on a red gown, carried a red leather bag, and wore black heels. She walked into the courtroom like she owned the place. Everyone was surprised. Questions like, "What is she doing here?" were the murmurs that filled the courtroom. "How dare you walk into my courtroom? You should know that it is wrong to barge into a courtroom while it is in session, Pam," the judge fired at her. "Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor, but it is for a good cause," she said, as she approached the judge and handed him a letter. She went to Daniel's stand and introduced herself. "Hello, Mr. Daniel. My name is Pamela Jo Bondi. You can call me Pam, and I will be your attorney for this case." Daniel didn't understand what was happening and asked her how this was possible. Pam told him she had followed the case from the beginning, and it didn't sit right with her. Seeing as she had free time, she decided to help him out. The judge looked furious. "Miss Pam, a moment, please." Pam approached the judge, who was already looking furious. "What is this?" he asked. "Well, sir, that is the paper from City Hall that allows me to represent my client, Mr. Daniel, in court since no verdict has been given," Pam replied with a smile. "I hate you and your guts. I hope you know that, right?" the judge asked Pam, who turned to return to Daniel. "I know you don't mean that. Everyone loves me," Pam said, as she walked to Daniel, who was still in shock. The courtroom was called to order, so they resumed the session. Pam took the lead by asking for her client to be granted bail and for the case to be adjourned for a week so she could have time with her client and they could go over the details before they reappeared in court. She was opposed, but the judge granted her wish because it wouldn't be a fair fight if she didn't get all her facts about the case straight. Daniel was granted bail, and the case was adjourned for a week. Pam smiled victoriously as she took Daniel's hand and headed to the bail room, where she applied for bail, which was granted. However, many still wondered who Pam Bondi was. How influential was she in legal matters? And why did the judge confess to hating her guts? Pamela Jo Bondi was born in Geneva and was one of 3 children to her father, the mayor, in the late 90s. Just like her father, Pam had a strong sense of justice from watching her father work as a child. She saw how loved he was by all and wanted to walk his path, which made her get her first degree in criminal justice from the University of Geneva. Pam Bondi was not just any lawyer. Because of her strong sense of justice, she became a force to be reckoned with by all. She was well known for her sharp tongue, which showed in arguments. Her fearless approach to justice led her to take on high-profile cases, and Pam built a reputation that put fear into the minds and hearts of corrupt officials and criminals alike. After her first degree, she went to law school, and her years there were of hard work, a will to win, and a strong sense of justice. Her classmates crammed and paid their way to pass exams, but Pam had to do it with all her heart and soaked herself in everything just to be good. Pam went as far as going to court sessions to witness how real-world cases were handled. She even interned and worked part-time for public defenders and law firms to build herself up. She became known as a young protege who would be a fierce figure in the future, and she made sure to make everyone who believed in her proud. Her major case came in after she had just graduated from law school, with many law firms doing all they could to have her on their team. Her first case involved her defending a homeless man who was wrongfully accused of stealing. The evidence against him was enough to have him locked up for life, but Pam didn't give up on the case as she searched for the truth. She uncovered a cover-up that had been going on for years, leaving many unsolved cases open and leading to a property developer. Winning that case got her a lot of recognition and put her in the spotlight for everyone to see. From that day, she decided to work for the public and only take on cases where the odds were against her client and the system was rigged. Watching, listening, and reading about Daniel Myers' case, she couldn't help herself because it was cases like this she lived for. She could feel it in her bones that something wasn't right about the case. She couldn't understand if the delays were due to inadequate evidence or a lack of proper representation. However, from all she saw and read, she felt the prosecution wanted to wrap things up quickly before the truth came to light. She had handled cases like that in the past, so she knew the behavioral pattern that came with hiding something. She was convinced someone was setting Daniel up. Based on her observations of the case, she decided it was time to step in and fight for justice. Pam left the court that morning with Daniel, and they first went to a diner where Daniel could eat and get answers to all his questions. She got Daniel a burger and a smoothie, while she got coffee for herself. She saw how Daniel rushed down the burger and waited for him to finish before getting to the real business. Soon, they got talking, and Daniel explained that on the day of the incident, he had just arrived in Geneva from Moldova, looking for a fresh start, when he met Sean in a bar. He and Sean got talking. Sean promised to help him if he kept a clean slate for the next couple of weeks, and he was grateful. He went after Sean because he realized he could not reach him when he wanted to. Then his head dropped, and sadness filled his voice. If only I had gotten there in time, Sean would still be alive. He was so kind to me, Daniel said. Pam tapped her fingers on the table, playing a melodious tune and processing everything. She consoled Daniel and got him a place to stay. Pam helped him get a place to sleep and left him to sort himself out. She promised to check in on him and keep him company if need be, for which he was grateful. That night, Daniel got a call from an unknown number that told him to agree to the crime, or else a lot of people would be in pain because of him. The following morning, he got a threatening letter. It was just there on the floor in front of his room. Daniel was scared but couldn't admit to a crime he didn't commit. He called Pam, who rushed over, and he told her everything. Pam asked him not to worry because she was going to handle it. She cloned his phone in case the caller called again, and that night was no different. That was what she wanted. She made a few phone calls to have the phone number tracked, but they were dead ends. The recorded call was evidence enough that Daniel was innocent, but she needed more than that. She wanted to uncover the entire story. She spent the rest of the week digging through police reports, surveillance footage, and financial records. She discovered too many inconsistencies. She knew something was swept under the rug at the expense of an innocent man. The day finally came for Daniel to reappear in court, and this time, he had hope because he had one of the best lawyers on his side. He was grateful to God that she came to his rescue. The morning of the trial was tense. The courtroom was filled with reporters, onlookers, and legal professionals, all eager to see the judge give a swift verdict. The prosecution had worked hard to ensure everything was neatly tied up, if not for the unnecessary delay in Pam Bondi's interest in the case. The judge entered the courtroom, and the bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise!" The entire courtroom stood and remained standing until the judge took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and gave a firm nod. "Court is now in session," the judge declared, and everyone took their seats. "The prosecution may proceed," he said, as he opened the case file before him. The lead prosecutor wasted no time in approaching the judge with his remarks on the case. He walked with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won, and nothing could stop him. "Your Honor, we have presented clear evidence that the defendant, Daniel Myers, was at the crime scene. The witness statements, forensic reports, and motive all point to one truth: the fact that Daniel Myers is indeed guilty. There was a murmur in the courtroom as everyone there talked about how damning the evidence was against Daniel. Daniel's heart was pounding hard inside him with fear, but seeing Pam's confidence, he could only help himself by encouraging himself. Today, unlike previous times, he was not alone. Pam Bondi was seated beside Daniel, and from the looks of things, she didn't look bothered about the case. She tapped her pen against her notepad, playing a melodious tune. Her facial expression was unreadable. No one could tell what she was thinking. The judge heard the tune she was playing and lashed at her, calling her immature and unprofessional. He added that she should know that several of her colleagues disliked her because she portrayed childish behaviors. However, his insulting words didn't faze Pam. She had been in countless trials, and she knew the judge was only reacting to her out of spite because she was sure he was in on the whole plan to lock Daniel up. That thought alone made her blood boil. Apart from the time she dedicated to the case, she spent the last 48 hours revisiting the case files, and everything she found was still the same. The whole story didn't add up. After hurling insults at Pam, the judge took a deep breath and stalled for a few minutes before turning toward her. Miss Bondi, as the defendant's newly appointed attorney, do you have anything to say before I allow the prosecution to continue and give my verdict? Pam stood up with her confident smile, adjusted her blazer, and dropped her pen before moving to face the court. Your Honor, as a matter of fact, I have plenty to say. Her words showed no sign of lost hope, but a confidence that meant she would win the case. She added, Your Honor, I would like to start with this. Daniel Myers, my client, is not guilty. I have the evidence to prove it. The courtroom instantly got covered up with the audience murmuring. She has done it again, some said. She must be insane to think she can win this one, others added. The prosecutor's confident smile faded in seconds, and the judge looked surprised. He knew she had something up her sleeve. Whatever it wasn't good. Proceed, Miss Bondi, the judge said, maintaining his composure. Pam walked toward the center of the courtroom before turning to face the jury. She began with the phone call and letter Daniel had received, which threatened him with admitting to a crime he didn't commit. The opposition didn't allow her claim to stand by, adding that the call could have been planned so Pam could help Daniel. The prosecution added that Pam and Daniel might have worked together on this, which is why Pam decided to show her face in court to back Daniel up, and he was sure Daniel was paying her off the books to cover for his crime. Pam was furious about the prosecution's allegations, but kept her cool. Pam and the prosecution continued the matter while the jury followed their lead. She knew it was time to bring out her big guns, so she stood before the judge. Your Honor, I have new evidence that will change everything, she said this time, and it was more definite than her first claim. The judge got upset again and insulted Pam under the disguise that she could have played her trump card from the beginning, so they wouldn't have had to sit this long. Pam smiled and assured the judge that he would understand why when he reviewed the evidence. Pam went to her table, picked up an envelope, opened it to reveal a thick folder, and placed it on the judge's table. This folder contains more evidence that proves Daniel Myers is innocent and that this case was built on lies, which I am sure you, of all people, already know about, she said with a smile that scared even the judge. The courtroom became silent as she dropped the folder on the judge's table while they all waited for the judge to say something. They heard Pam's voice as she continued, saying, The police tampered with the evidence that was brought before you. The prosecution buried a key witness's testimony of someone who tailed Daniel Myers because he wanted Daniel's help. But more importantly, Your Honor, she paused. That folder also contains evidence that Shawn Mendes isn't dead. There was a loud gasp from the courtroom, followed by comments. She must be crazy. Okay, seems like she has finally lost it. The murmurs and comments kept increasing, and Pam wasn't fazed by it. She wasn't moved by the comments at all. The prosecution rose and insulted her, calling her mentally challenged, but she laughed and asked that the guard at the entrance open the door. As the doors opened, a figure walked in and approached the witness stand. The figure was wearing a black hoodie and a baseball cap. A face mask on the figure's face also didn't allow anyone to recognize who it was. The figure took off everything that made him unrecognizable, and there he was in the flesh, Shawn Mendes. How was that possible? They were all about to find out. There was chaos in the courtroom as people couldn't believe their eyes. The prosecution was all shocked and knew it was over for them. Daniel nearly collapsed. He watched Shawn pass, but how was Shawn still alive? The judge stammered, but got himself under control before asking Shawn to reveal what had happened to everyone. Shawn took the mandatory oath to speak the truth as was customary in court. He proceeded to add that he faked his demise because he was an undercover agent who was after a substance cartel in Peneva. His cover was almost blown, so he had to fake his passing. Shawn went on to add that his coming out to testify now was against his orders, and it was putting his life and that of his family at risk, but he had to do the right thing. Shawn apologized for the trauma he put Daniel through because his agency manipulated the case file for one of their own, so it could look real. The judge hit his gavel hard and screamed, "Case dismissed." It was yet another win for Pam, who smiled and walked up to Daniel to congratulate him. "I told you something wasn't right, and I am glad you let me handle your case," she said with a smile. Daniel was in tears and couldn't believe he wasn't going to jail. Daniel. He hugged Pam so tightly, she felt like her bones would break. She was happy she could help. There was one other thing left for her to do: sue the city for falsifying evidence and putting her client in emotional turmoil. As she and Daniel made their way to the courtroom entrance, some men in black suits met them and apologized for what Daniel had to endure. They then gave Daniel a check to compensate for the damages. Daniel was reluctant to collect it, but Pam told him she would have sued the city if he hadn't been compensated, so it was a win for him. Daniel took the check and remained grateful to Pam. "What would you do with all that money?" Pam asked. "Finish my studies and run a business of my own. Who knows? I could change professions too if I want to," Daniel replied as they went outside, where TV and radio reporters were waiting for Daniel to make a statement. Did you learn anything from this story? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. You can also turn on the notification bell to be notified of new posts. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen. See you next time.